face. And ASEAN has an important role on the global stage, where geopolitical divides threaten to trigger new conflicts while making old ones more difficult to resolve. As I told yesterday's summit meeting, we must avoid at all costs the division of the global economy into two parts, led by the two biggest economies, the United States and China. Such a rift with two different sets of rules, two dominant currencies, two internets, and two conflicting strategies on artificial intelligence would undermine the world's capacity to respond to the dramatic challenges we face. ASEAN members are particularly well placed to help bridge this divide. We must have one global economy, one global market with access for all. Yesterday's meeting was an opportunity for a valuable exchange with ASEAN leaders on issues including Myanmar, the war in Ukraine, the global energy and food crisis, as well as the climate emergency that confronts us all. The situation in Myanmar is an unending nightmare for the people of the country and a threat to peace and security across the region. Indiscriminate attacks on civilians are horrendous and heartbreaking. I urge the authorities of Myanmar to listen to their people, release political prisoners, and get the democratic transition back on track immediately. That is the only way to stability and peace. ASEAN has taken a principled approach through the five-point consensus. I urge all countries, including ASEAN members, to seek a unified strategy towards Myanmar centered on the needs and aspirations of the country's people. I reiterate my call for urgent action by the Myanmar authorities to create conditions for the voluntary return of almost 1 million Rohingya refugees. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I have just come from the COP27 climate summit in Egypt, and I am going to the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia. These two meetings are crucial to the ASEAN region, and ASEAN member states are essential to the multilateral solutions that must emerge from these two meetings. First, the climate talks. The largest economies have the greatest responsibility to cut emissions and keep rising temperatures within the 1.5 degrees limit of the Paris Agreement. But every country has a part to play. And I'm calling for an historic pact, a climate solidarity pact between developed and emerging economies, and the biggest ones will be in Bali, under which they would combine resources and capacities for the benefit of all to rescue our planet. They need to be united in order to defeat climate change. Developed countries must lead the effort to get to net zero emissions. But the only way to prevent our climate from catastrophic overheating is for a climate solidarity pact under which rich countries, multilateral development banks, and technology companies provide support to emerging economies to enable them to speed their transition to renewable energy. And I commend ASEAN member states that are showing the way through just energy transition partnerships, like Indonesia and Vietnam. 5 ASEAN member states are in the top 20 countries most impacted by extreme weather events in the past 2 decades. I'm urging leaders at COP27 to reach agreement on a financial mechanism to support countries that suffer loss and damage from climate-related disasters. Second, the G20. My priority in Bali will be to speak up for countries in the global south that have been battered by the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate emergency and now face crises in food, energy and finance, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine and crushing debt. I'm pushing G20 leaders to adopt a stimulus package to provide governments in the developing world with the investments and liquidity they need to get through these challenges and speed up debt relief and restructuring. We are also working to alleviate the looming food crisis by extending the Black Sea Grain Initiative for Ukraine grains and by removing obstacles to the export of Russian food and fertilizers. Rice is the crop most affected by the huge increase in fertilizer prices, which obviously has serious implications for the ASEAN region. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, in these turbulent times, regional organizations, including ASEAN, are essential to building global solutions. Our collaboration with ASEAN continues to grow across areas from conflict prevention to climate action, sustainable development and social protection. And I look forward to building even stronger and more productive relations in the years ahead. I am at your disposal for 4 questions.
Okay, for questions, please come to the mic. Yes,
Wait a bit. Good morning, Mr. Antonio Guterres. Yep, I'm Chup Nareksa from Radio Frank International in Khmer language. Right, I have a few quick questions regarding to the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which adopted in 2010 and 2012 in Cambodia. So, it is a decade and 10-year anniversary of ASEAN Human Rights Declaration in 2022. From your perspective, what have you been seeing regarding to the human rights issue in ASEAN for a decade? And for Cambodia, what do you think? Thank you.
Well, the situation is obviously different from country to country. But I would like, first of all, to underline that human rights are economic, social, cultural, political, and civic. And you need to see human rights in its broader perspective. We have with ASEAN a cooperation agreement on human rights, and there will be in 2 weeks' time a meeting with the ASEAN Committee on Human Rights. And of course, as I mentioned yesterday, it is extremely important that human rights are fully respected: economic, social, cultural, political, and civic. And indeed, my appeal, and namely my appeal in a country like Cambodia, is for the public space to be open and for human rights defenders and climate activists to be protected, and for the cooperation with the civil society to be extended. At the same time, our biggest preoccupation in relation to human rights is, of course, Myanmar. That is where the systematic violations of human rights are, I would say, absolutely unacceptable and causing enormous suffering to the Myanmarese people.
Okay. Sorry, can you go to the mic, please? Next question over here.
Yes, my name is Sarat, from a journalist from Cambodia.
Before you start, I do not see you. Ah, there, okay.
Yeah. I just would like to have the question specific about Cambodia. What is your valuation about the situation of human rights in Cambodia? Because based on the human rights rapporteur's report about the human rights situation in Cambodia, so the civil space like human rights is strict, something like that. So what is your valuation in general? And did the UN raise about the political issue and human rights with the Cambodia during this meeting?
Well, I already answered the question to the previous speaker, and as I said, it's important to have a public space, civic space that is expanded. It's important for human rights defenders and for climate activists to be protected, and for the civil society to play a wider role in society. So that was clearly my message, and as I said, we intend to enhance our cooperation with ASEAN in relation to human rights and we are hopeful that this cooperation will lead to meaningful improvements.
Good morning, sir. My name is Rosie, and I am a reporter from Thmai Thmai and Cambodia Nest. I have two questions for you in connection with the Ukraine and Myanmar crisis. So my first question is, what is your expectation of the ASEAN joint statement on the Ukraine crisis? And my second question is, yes, on the Ukraine crisis, the crisis in Ukraine. Yes, sir. And my second question is, to what extent would you like to see ASEAN cooperate with the United Nations in resolving the crisis in Myanmar? Thank you.
Well, in relation to the second question, it is clear that what is very important is that the 5-point consensus that we support moves ahead. And I trust the Indonesian presidency that will be dealing with the issue to develop a number of initiatives allowing for the objective that I mentioned to be finally achieved. We need to go back to democracy, to a transition to democracy. We need to release political prisoners. We need to establish an inclusive process. And I'm confident that the Indonesian presidency will be working hard in the next year in that respect. In relation to the Ukraine, basically our position in the United Nations is clear. What happened in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, was a violation of the Charter. Was a violation of the territorial integrity of the Ukraine, but at the same time it is very important to create the conditions for progressively dialogue to be reestablished and progressively to start looking into a future where peace will prevail. Not any kind of peace, peace based on the values of the UN Charter and peace based on international law.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Gutierrez. Morning, Mr. Gutierrez. May Wong from CNA, Singapore Television Station. What is your response to criticisms that the United Nations...
I'm sorry, I don't see your mouse. So, what is my...
What is your response to criticisms that the United Nations as well as ASEAN have failed the Myanmar people? And also regarding the 15-point statement that ASEAN has written up yesterday and endorsed, how do you think that statement is really going to make a real difference on the ground in Myanmar? Thank you.
So, the second question was the declaration?
Regarding the 15-point statement that ASEAN has come up with to try and find a proper solution in moving forward for ASEAN.
Well, first of all, everybody has failed in relation to Myanmar. The international community as a whole has failed, and the UN is part of the international community. It is dramatic to see the suffering of the Myanmarese people. Now, in relation to the movement forward and ASEAN's movement forward, as I said, I believe that the Indonesian presidency, with whom we have been cooperating with the government of Indonesia very closely in relation to Myanmar, I believe the Indonesian government will be able to push forward the agenda in a positive way, and my special envoy is ready to fully cooperate with the ASEAN envoy in order to be able to create the conditions to reestablish, as I mentioned, the democratic transition, to let the political prisoners go in freedom, and to end the dramatic violations of human rights in Myanmar.
Thank you very much. That's all we have time for. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. All the best.